The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on where you are listening in from today. Welcome to Device Authority's first webinar of 2018 with special guests PTC. My name is Rosa Lenders, and I am pleased to introduce our speakers for today, James Penny and Paul Hames. James is Director of Product Management at Device Authority. He has worked in security for over 12 years, architecting and deploying complex projects for organizations across many industries. He has also designed several apps which have featured on the Apple Store. In his spare time, he takes an interest in fast cars. You might spot him in Sunnyvale driving his Mustang while he saves up for his 1997 Ferrari F355 GTS. Paul is Vice President of Pre-Sales at PTC. Based in their head office in Farnborough, UK, he is responsible for Europe, Middle East, India, and Africa. His background is in engineering and industrial design. Married with 2 sons, he is an Arsenal football fan. Unfortunately, his kids support Man United and Chelsea. We expect the webinar to last approximately an hour, and we hope you can stay until the end to hear about our great offers available to help accelerate your IoT projects. You will be able to submit questions via the question window in the GoToWebinar control panel throughout the session. We will try and answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. A recording of the webinar will be made available tomorrow on the Device Authority website, and everyone who has registered will be emailed the link. I shall now hand over to our speakers.
Thank you, Rosa, for the great introduction. So if we could bring up, see the first slide. Thank you. Okay, so a quick introduction to medical and healthcare IoT for those that are not immediately familiar with it or are new to the sector. Healthcare devices such as insulin pumps, defibrillators, cardiac monitors, oxygen tanks, etc., are becoming rapidly common in patient monitoring services, providing patients and their caregivers valuable real-time information without being tethered to a hospital or healthcare facility. These devices help get patients the care they need when they need it, and really help reduce the amount of time spent in hospitals, which helps save the patient's time and saves organizations money. There's a massive opportunity in the medical sector for disruption through innovative connected healthcare devices that bring significant health and lifestyle benefits for patients. Of course, there are financial benefits too. Manufacturers, healthcare providers, insurance agencies, I'm sure I've missed some, are all keen to see the cost savings that can be achieved through real-time patient monitoring. So the potential results are very appealing for a large number of patients, where they can be freed from the shackles of hospital-bound observation or simply get peace of mind over their current health status. Next slide. So the benefits, really, the healthcare industry can get a lot of value from the Internet of Things. Medical devices that can transmit dynamic patient data from the home or when a patient is out and about to caregiving staff allows them to have a real-time monitoring of the patient's health. And this can really help improve the coordination and delivery of the patient care. You can monitor the effectiveness of a given treatment so that the information can be fed back into the treatment plan sessions with the doctor. Patient dosing records, another great example, can be automated and maintained without needing a human to really input the information, which would help dramatically reduce potential errors. And through the use of analytics, treatment data sets can be aggregated, analyzed to help gain new insights into treatments, conditions, and diseases that were maybe previously too costly or time-consuming for a human to decipher. Connected devices can also increase efficiencies and cost savings for the manufacturer or equipment provider. Things such as remote configuration functions can significantly reduce time and costs of deployment compared to, say, rolling a truck and having someone on site to set it up for them. Device maintenance requirements can be preempted, which can help to reduce downtime, and the information can be fed back into the folks in your R&D department so that they have visibility on potential weak points in the device, thus allowing you to implement changes in future revisions that can give greater longevity and again, benefit all around. Okay, next slide, thank you. So there's kind of a lot going on in this diagram, but what it really is illustrating is some of the benefits to multiple stakeholders at various stages in the medical device lifecycle. I'm not going to pick up on all of these and point them all out and talk about them, but there are a few good examples shown here that include monitoring the device functionality while it's in the patient's home to improve customer service and things like product design. Data from medicinal devices may be correlated to learn health outcomes and enable advanced insight into the efficacy of the device. Healthcare providers, another good example, monitoring patient data allows them to make quicker decisions to adjust maybe dosing as necessary or be alerted to patient abnormalities. And in the bottom left here, customer service can get the data feedback from the device and can anticipate device maintenance needs and pre-schedule the repairs or the replacements. Obviously, all of that relevant data, as I briefly touched on the last slide, can be fed back into the R&D process to help improve the future device revisions and updates. Okay. So just a few things to highlight regarding design considerations. Designing a connected medical device that offers remote monitoring is a very different prospect to those designed for in-hospital use, or even those designed for common IoT use cases, come to think of it. So often the intended use case will pretty much determine the shape of the device, right? You can't fit an oxygen pump into a tiny little box typically, but it may not always be in the best device's operating interest to be as tiny as possible. There are things to think of, especially when you bridge that physical to digital world, because things such as high-powered electronics can interfere with the radio performance and affect wireless communication, right? So Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, some of those other things, those radios can all be affected by some of the electronic components. So, finding the right layout, physical layout, and PCB and board layout will typically require a bit of creativity and custom design on your part. In addition to making the devices more compact, just on this last point, if the device is to be body worn, they also obviously need to be as comfortable and discreet as possible. Otherwise, patients may not be willing to wear them despite the obvious benefits to their health and their peace of mind. So just a few kind of high-level design considerations from a physical device perspective that I think are good things to point out as anyone going into the new design of a brand new device. Okay. And so before I hand over to Paul, I just wanted to quickly point out some research that the PTC team actually found following their 2017 LiveWorks show, which I was at. I thought it was a very good show. PTC always put on a great event there out in Boston. Clearly, security is a top priority, looking at these statistics, and we really look forward to working with anyone requiring a robust security solution at LiveWorks this year in June. It's also worth noting that healthcare and medical is highlighted as a key theme at LiveWorks this year. So I hope to get to meet some of you there and discuss some of your potential projects and how Device Authority, in conjunction with PTC ThingWorx might be able to help. Okay. And with that, I shall hand over to Paul.
Okay, thanks, James. And good afternoon and good morning and good evening, everyone. So as Rosa mentioned, I work for PTC. I look after part of our European pre-sales organization. I'm talking to you today from the British Motor Museum, where I've just closed off the UK Applied Visualization Summit. And I'd like to start by thanking Device Authority for inviting PTC to speak at their webinar. So PTC and Device Authority, as was already mentioned, we're partners. We have a long list of joint customers using our IoT platform together with Device Authority's enhanced security solutions. So today I'm here to talk to you about digital transformation in the medical device industry and also touch on why it makes sense to use a platform approach. And then I'm going to include and introduce a couple of customer use case examples to illustrate our joint capabilities. Next slide, please, Rosa. Now, before we begin, I'm going to take a moment just to introduce PTC, as I'm conscious some of you might not have heard of us before. So we're a reasonably large US-based software company, headquartered currently in Needham, just west of Boston, but soon to be relocating to our new headquarters in the Seaport district of Boston itself. And you can see that nice shiny building on the slide in front of you. Now, as a company, we have a rich heritage in engineering and helping companies design and make better products. And we're probably best known in the marketplace for two disruptive technologies. So we were first to market in the late 80s with a new CAD tool called ProEngineer, and that brought feature-based parametric modeling to the world. And then in the late 90s, we launched a product called Windchill, which was the first of the internet-centric product lifecycle management solutions. Now, more recently, we've invested heavily to develop our ThingWorx industrial IoT platform. And we've got close to 30,000 customers ranging from everyone from Airbus to Ferrari, for example, and pretty much everything in between. And of course, what that's given us is a reasonable understanding as to how companies go about designing products. And again, many of our customers are sort of medical device manufacturers as well. Next slide, please, Rosa. Now, I think it's fair to say that we live in exciting times. Internet of Things, Industry 4.0, Made in China, they're all terms which broadly mean the same. And if we just look at this term, the Internet of Things, and think about what's actually changing, well, the Internet itself, well, that's still the same vision that Tim Berners-Lee had, at the CERN Physics Laboratory around HTML and Internet protocols. And how information moves around is still pretty much the same. It's all about packet switching. Of course, it's the things themselves that are becoming more intelligent, they're becoming more connected, and obviously more interactive with us as users and consumers. Now, as a supplier to many medical device manufacturers, we have focused on digital, purely digital, for the last 20 years or so. And that's that digital definition that starts with CAD geometry. It moves on to PLM data with a slightly richer data set, which sometimes includes further upstream capabilities like systems engineering, requirements management, and some downstream capability around servicing information. But it was all about building up that full digital representation. No real visibility of the product once it has left the factory. And in many cases, from a device. Life in the field can be 10 to 20 times longer than it actually spends in the factory itself. Now, we see IoT as the opportunity to connect the physical product in the field back to the company, back to the people that created that digital definition. So you can understand how your product is being used. Is it being used and to make better decisions and removing the little uncertainty and guesswork perhaps from some of the engineers. Might sound interesting. It's a huge amount in theory. It's worth it. And perhaps you could be asking yourself what's sorry, Rosa, did you say? Rosa. Hello, Rosa.
Hi, Paul. I think your
James, can you hear me?
just gone a bit funny. Can you just check your internet, please? The sound, everyone's having problems hearing you.
I do beg your pardon. Yeah, I mean, I have a full, I have a good signal here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's carry on. This convergence of the physical and digital worlds is already well underway, and depending on whose report you actually read, there's approximately 20 billion connected devices on the planet today, and that's due to grow to anywhere between 40 and 80 billion by 2025. Now, that growth is pictured on the slide with anything between $4 and $11 trillion of economic impact from IoT per year. And they've structured this using a technique known as settings, which creates a slightly broader view than the traditional industry verticals. But what you can see on the slide is there's up to $1.6 trillion worth of value within that human setting, made up of med device, healthcare, and fitness. Now, perhaps some of the findings that you might find interesting. I mean, less than 1% of the data that's currently produced is actually put to good use. It's mainly used for anomaly detection. That nearly 40% of the value that's going to be created will come from developing nations. So perhaps not where your traditional customer base is today. And while a lot of the headlines are all consumer-based around self-driving cars and fitness apps, actually 70% of this business, of the value of the business, is going to come from a business-to-business type approach. And why is it happening now? Well, it's driven by three key developments. First of all, it's lower computing costs. Secondly, it's cheaper storage. And thirdly, less costly bandwidth for communication. So for example, if we think back to the mid-90s, the cost of 1 million transistors on a chip was over $200. And those same million transistors today is going to cost you between 5 and 6 cents. Next slide, please, Rosa. Hello, Rosa. Can you hear me? Here we go. Okay, so it's fair to say I think many companies are struggling. Recent survey by Bain showed that there's a bit of a gap between IoT strategy and IoT adoption. And I think many companies can see the value of IoT-driven transformation, but they don't quite yield the benefits that they expect. And together with some of the advisory groups, we classify some of the pitfalls along the lines of investments that are spread too thinly. So many ideas about how IoT can help the business, but they're not necessarily prioritized and focused on in the right way. Sometimes we see a lack of clarity on how IoT is actually going to either make money or save money for the company, so how it's going to monetize. We often see companies using traditional waterfall project methods to deliver IoT projects. The way we work within an IoT environment with apps and so forth really means that we want to be working in far more of an agile, perhaps Scrum-based approach to the project. We also see some companies underestimating how much it's going to cost to scale an IoT project from the proof of concept. It can impact a large amount of the business, and that again costs money. And lastly, I think an area that again companies struggle with is that they need to bring in new talent to join the existing experience within a company to make all of this work. So again, it's about bringing the right skills and understanding about okay, so let's move on to the next slide, Rosa, please. All right, so why is it all so difficult? And let's take a look at maybe how some companies have attacked IoT in the past. Now, at one end of the scale, you can choose to do it all of yourself. You can embed sensors, you can write code, you can then deal with the complex connectivity challenge to get that data into the cloud or perhaps on a server. And then if you've got time after all that's done, maybe you can actually write some analysis code that's going to give some insights into the data itself. And history has shown us that while you might be able to get that to work in a proof of concept, it is almost impossible to get it to scale out to the enterprise. Now, at the other end of the spectrum from that DIY approach, you can pay a company to do it for you. A systems integrator, advisory group will be happy to build you this big turnkey solution. But I think some of the challenges here are that it's possibly going to be eye-wateringly expensive for you, and also you are married to that provider for all of your future IoT needs. Now, somewhere in between these two options is where IoT platforms come in. Now, they offer a more cost-effective and easy to use and scalable option, and there's a growing number of them out there today offering a range of capabilities. So you can think of that IoT platform as your foundation on which to build your environment, and it includes everything from sensors and connectivity through to insights and perhaps augmented reality experience. So let's now just take a quick look at what's included in a leading IoT platform such as ThingWorx. Next slide, please, Rosa. Okay, so starting on the left, so the ability to connect your devices, connect your sensors with gateways, and then get that data onto your cloud, our cloud, or somebody else's cloud. It really doesn't matter. And it's also about connecting not just the product, but perhaps also the factory as well. And we offer a range of proprietary or industry standard protocols like Modbus or MQTT to do that connectivity onto the shop floor. Now, critical, I think, for med device applications is an understanding of what that data is telling you, and this ability for analysis, either on the device itself, is this sensor telling me it's steady state, or have we got a problem? Or perhaps even doing the analysis in the cloud, where we're bringing to bear machine learning and pattern recognition algorithms to predict future behavior. Those are all sorts of areas of real value to a med device company. In the middle, we've got Create. So this is really the core of the ThingWorx platform, where we're able to establish the model of what it is you're connecting to. And it's about being able to then create dashboards and experiences quickly to enable that data to be presented in the right way for the consumer. So, for example, an executive might want an overall dashboard view, whereas a service technician is going to need a very much more focused view on the task that he's being asked to perform. So different dashboards, different mechanisms for different users. Moving on to experience. Here, this is about how a med device company might use augmented reality to complete that feedback loop to the end user. So this is a highly interactive, highly engaging way to present the IoT data overlaid in the user's view. And some of you will have seen that on things like tablets or smartphones, or perhaps wearables like a HoloLens, for example. And lastly, we need to ensure that there is a key network for developers to have access to ThingWorx and the tools that they need for their projects. So that includes education programs, it includes trial editions, support for online communities, and so forth. And we also have something called the ThingWorx Marketplace, which is like an online one-stop shop where you can get everything from UI widgets to drag into your dashboards to adapters for ERP connections within your med device company. Next slide, Rosa. And if we then look at how the ThingWorx platform is sort of structured, at the center, we've got something called ThingWorx Foundation, and this is where we capture the details of the thing you want to connect to. So that's all about modeling the device. It has a concept of properties and services, allowing bidirectional transfer. So that's where we actually do the physical connections. ThingWorx Utilities contains the common business functions, managing alerts, workflow engine, for example, so that we're able to execute processes based on inputs, and also the ability for us to deploy and manage software updates to your connected medical device. Industrial connectivity, as I mentioned, is all about how we connect to the factory floor with a comprehensive library of interfaces, everything from connectors from PLCs, from Siemens or Rockwell, right up to the industry standard protocols, as I mentioned earlier. ThingWorx Studio is where we create the augmented reality experiences using a drag and drop environment, so no need to create any or do any coding. And lastly, in maroon, we have the analytics engine, which enables us to make sense of the data that we're gathering. And I'm sure many of you have heard the saying that if data is the new oil, then analytics are the new refineries. And our analytics engine is obviously going to be applying those machine learning algorithms to identify patterns within the data, which perhaps lead to an event like a failure. So hopefully you've got a slightly better understanding of IoT platforms, why they're becoming more and more popular for companies beginning their sort of IoT transformational journeys. Next slide, please, Rosa. So I'm going to now move on to some examples of customers where we can see IoT and analytics in use. And these, again, are companies that both PTC and Device Authority are working with. Next slide, please, Rosa. So firstly, let's start with Elector. So Elector are based in Sussex in the UK. They're a manufacturer of MRI, magnetic resonance imaging equipment, installed in hospitals all over the world. And obviously a very high value asset and critically important to patient diagnosis. Now, they're probably PTC's largest IoT customer in Europe in terms of data production. And just to give you maybe some idea of the scale, in any given month with Elector, there are in excess of 10 billion data items sent from the Elector machines to their cloud environment, which consume over 200 gigabytes of cloud storage. And that's from over 10,000 registered assets or machines around the world. And there's also anything up to around about 30,000 remote connectivity sessions that take place with those machines. Now, Elector, 50% of their business was based around the servicing of their machines and obviously keeping them running as much as possible. Now, the remote sessions that I mentioned are typically the maintenance and the updates that are being done over the air. Now, that's enabled Elector to cut their visit costs by 30%, making, again, a significant improvement in their service margins as a business. And it's one of the sort of more tangible benefits that we get from an IoT deployment and remote asset monitoring. But as a result of that, they're also able to offer things like higher service level agreements, which gives them a competitive advantage in the marketplace and improves the value of their product to the hospitals. Now, as you can imagine, with all of that data, they're doing predictive analytics on this, and they're currently using some business intelligence tools and a little bit of manual pattern recognition to spot trends and predict failures, meaning that they typically the device at least 2 weeks, about 14 days before anything wrong. And they're now looking to the future about how they can offer these machines as a service on a sort of pay per scan basis, which puts these high value assets, these costly assets, within reach from, let's say, some of the smaller hospitals, which is obviously good for patient healthcare. So that's just a little bit about Elector. If we can move on, Rosa. Okay, have we got a network connection problem again? Oh, here we go. Okay, so this next example is around analytics in healthcare. It's about what we do with the data, perhaps in a healthcare setting. Now, it's a customer use case from a few years ago to predict chronic kidney disease in adults in the United States. And I'm including this use case really to illustrate the process of performing predictive analytics in healthcare. And this begins with creating a model based on historical information, which then can be applied to future data to provide the insights that you're looking for. And that could be, as we're going to see here, applied to patient data, or it could be applied to medical device data for things like predictive maintenance and so forth. The process is the same. Now, as you can see on the slide, the cost of managing kidney disease patients and this end-stage renal disease is huge for healthcare providers. And any patient that you can catch early and diagnose early is a saving of up to $250,000. So the benefits of identifying these problems early are significant. Next slide, please, Rosa. Okay, I think it's changing. Rosa? Rosa, can you hear me? I think we got some network issues again.
Yeah, Paul, I think it's coming from your end though, but it's the slide is up. It's been up for 30 seconds or so. Can you see it?
All right, let's just keep. No, not yet, but let's keep. I'll just keep going. That's fine.
It's definitely up. Okay.
So in the example, we were asked to predict patients at risk of developing kidney disease in the next 12 months. Now, we started this with a data set of just over 3.5 patients who were within the criteria set by the healthcare provider. And that was that they were insured for 2 years, they were between 40 and 64 years old, and no history of kidney problems in the past. Now, of those existing 3.5 million patient records, just less than 25,000 went on to develop kidney problems, and that's approximately 0.0%. So that really is looking like looking for a needle in a haystack. Now, the first step in the process that we go through with analytics is to make the data analytics ready. And this is where, to a certain extent, the skills of a data scientist are needed. So the information is reviewed, for example, the demographics, things like age, male or female, location, and so forth. Any flags that we have in the data will with other types of pre-existing conditions, so maybe heart failure or diabetes, for example, and also previous claim amounts and the number of visits to the hospital in a year are also included. And the data is then, once understood, it's conditioned for the analytics process. And this, again, is where we do things like removing the long-tail distributions. And what that means is that if a patient perhaps has had more than 15 visits to the hospital in a year, then we cap the data at 15, so it avoids. And we also do things like positive class saturation, where we look to emphasize certain areas that could be significant for us. And then we're ready to start building that analytics model in ThingWorx. Now, at the start of the process, the ThingWorx engine takes 20% of the data and separates it off, and it's going to use that to test its model and deliver an accuracy of the results at the end. Now, our analytics engine then uses a range of analytics techniques, a range of algorithms such as neural networks, decision trees, regressions, and so forth to identify the patterns. So what happened? Well, at the end of the analytical model, it came out at being 81% accurate. So that again is testing itself on that 20% of the data, and anything above 70% in an analytics context is seen as reasonably good. So what do the results tell us? Well, in the model, every patient is given a risk score between 0 and 100%. And it's not possible and it's not practical for care managers to contact every one of those people, but what they wanted us to do was focus on those individuals with a risk of greater than 80%. And the task they set us, what we had to do was correctly identify a minimum of 40% of those patients who actually went on to develop kidney problems. And bear in mind, we're still talking about that learning data set. Now, our model went on to come out at 48%, which when you actually do the maths on that is around about 12,000 patients, 12,000 people that were correctly identified of the 3.5 million on the list that were going on to develop kidney disease. And of course, by catching that condition early, there's a potential saving just in that exercise of over $3 billion to the healthcare provider and the insurer. Now, once we've got that analytical model, that is then what we use to apply to future data. And that's what's in place. That's what's being used now to help identify patients at potential risk of developing kidney problems in the United States across 5 or 6 states. So it's an interesting example of how analytics can be applied. And again, I would mention exactly the same technique is applied if you're a med device manufacturer in terms of looking at the predictive analytics and the predictive maintenance scenarios that IoT can unlock. All right, so let's just move on to my last slide before I hand back to James. It'll change over a little sooner. Are we doing? Rosa swapped. Oh, here we go. All right. So lastly, I want to introduce a company who have just launched their first connected device. So this is Gas Control Equipment, or GCE as they're probably better known. And they're a joint customer for PTC and Device Authority. They've got about 1,000 employees around the world, and they turn over about 100 million euros per year. So a reasonably large organization. Now, they have a healthcare division. They're based in the UK, which design and manufacture portable oxygen concentrators. So this enables patients with respiratory disorders to make or to manage their oxygen therapy from home rather than having to stay in hospital. So their product is the Zeno, and again, it's a portable device which is fully connected using the ThingWorx platform and secured by Device Authority technologies. And if we just think a little bit about perhaps the benefits of this type of product, well, for the clinician, it's about visibility of what the patient is doing, about the patient's condition via that sort of IoT connectivity and the dashboards that I mentioned earlier. And for the patient themselves, well, it means they're able to leave hospital sooner. And that obviously frees up beds and perhaps reduces the cost of the healthcare that they're receiving. So that's just a quick introduction. What I'm going to do now is hand back to James, who's hopefully got a slightly better internet connection than I have, to explain more about that technical solution that's in place. So James, back to you.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I hope so. Here in Silicon Valley, it tends to be pretty well connected, but let's see how we do. So, yeah, I mean, this was actually a really great project to work on. GC, very switched on and fantastic example of a company that takes security very seriously from the beginning. I can't explain or go into too much detail about the low level kind of information about what's really going on due to the nature of security projects, right? But I mean, they implemented secure hardware in their device, so that's again a great first step. And used the Device Authority authentication and policy-driven end-to-end encryption solution to really deliver a stronger identity assurance position. So that's to make sure they're talking to their known good GC devices when it's communicating with other infrastructure, and also encrypt all the data that flows from the device and over into the ThingWorx platform, where we, as Device Authority, have a data crypto extension that can plumb into existing services to allow you to sort of decrypt and gain visibility of that data when authorized and accessed by an appropriate user or service. So yeah, very good use case. Okay, so the next portion, compliance challenges and best practice guidelines. We're going to talk about a few different things here. Firstly, compliance, and then I'm going to go on to talk about some of the guidelines and common challenges with connecting up remote devices. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the GDPR on this slide because it's kind of looming and it's coming up. And so while connecting devices can really be beneficial to a lot of organizations and patients alike, there are some important regulations that we want to raise. And I'm sure most people on this webinar, if you're in the medical industry, you're probably already aware of the various rules, but it doesn't really hurt to lay these out again right now. So GDPR, I'm sure a lot of people have heard that acronym. It's a bit of a buzzword. It comes into effect May 25th this year. So if you're not ready, maybe reach out after we're done here and see what we can do and be happy to help you. But so there are really 5 points which are relevant to the Internet of Things. Firstly, security breaches. Obviously, a large concern for anyone building, supplying, or using connected medical devices. The GDPR introduces mandatory breach reporting. So personal data breaches must be reported within 72 hours. Secondly, consent. So the consent to process a user's data must be given through a clear, positive act that establishes a specific and unambiguous agreement to the patient's personal data being processed. Okay. Thirdly, privacy by design, and really privacy by default. Organizations, have got to implement technical and organizational measures and processes to demonstrate compliance with the GDPR, and they must conduct data protection impact assessments. Enhanced data subject rights. So in addition to the right to be forgotten, the right to object to automated decision-making is also covered. So it's important for anyone building a connected device, really, of any sort, but for medical devices, it's an incredibly important point. And the necessary capabilities have to be built in really from the start, so that these people can opt out of that automated decision-making process. And lastly, the processing of personal data relating to children. The GDPR actually establishes that it is not possible for children aged 12 and under to provide their own consent to personal data processing. Something to be aware of. And just moving on to the second half of this, so just quickly, HIPAA is an existing regulation set that really sets a good standard for protecting sensitive patient data. I guess unless you've been living under a rock or completely new to the medical industry, I'm sure most people are familiar with it. It defines how organizations really that deal with protected health information, or PHI, must secure their systems and data to prevent unauthorized access from all manners of threats, including physical access to systems, unauthorized access to networks, and any data transmitted throughout. It also defines encryption standards for protecting the data at rest and during processing. Device Authority's Keyscale platform provides end-to-end data encryption for PHI data, both at rest and while it is in transit, to really help organizations simplify compliance with those HIPAA regulations. Next slide, please. Okay. So there are some common challenges that we at Device Authority often help manufacturers kind of identify and address as part of the project discovery process. And it's important to note that these challenges aren't necessarily common to medical sector, but all IoT devices. So provisioning and managing unique security credentials and certificates at scale really requires an optimized solution. Legacy enterprise solutions that can create management headaches at scale. So using the existing user-based enrollment process will really not work for today's connected devices. They don't really scale that well in terms of procedure and operational scales. So public key infrastructure, or PKI, is a common tool for creating large networks of trusted users and devices. But I think historically the prospect of delivering PKI for large-scale IoT projects is a bit daunting, with concerns about managing the system, after it's been deployed, being the most common concern. Implementing a solution optimized to scale to the level that IoT requires through secure automation offers incredible value to device manufacturers. Managing 100 devices is easy. Managing 100,000 is hard. Encrypting data, in principle, is an easy task. I can set up a passphrase or encryption key and begin encrypting anything I want. But of course, encryption at scale should not use a single passphrase or encryption key. Managing the generation and subsequent authorized access to keys at scale is a pretty tough proposition. And there's a saying, encryption is easy, but managing the keys is hard. Connected devices, especially in the medical industry, often implement remote instructions or command and control features to allow for smarter, more effective patient care. Of course, any proactive or reactive medical process should prevent unauthorized attackers from really making use of these features. The consequences could be fatal in some circumstances. So, again, another kind of one-liner here, but controlling access to server resources is easy. Doing the same on the device is hard. Next slide, please. Okay, so should begin by really simply asking yourself some basic questions about the device. A lot of the smart features that allow manufacturers to deliver a compelling product often provide the low-hanging fruit for attackers. Consider what the device is capable of and how you might gain access through those interfaces. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, removable memory cards, USB, and other physical access ports. If not locked down, they will create a very easy entry point for an unauthorized user into the device. Also, take a look at the kind of data that is being processed by the device. Is it sending patient data? Does it receive remote command and control data for proactive medical care? Any sensitive data sent from the device should be encrypted, and any data received by the device should be validated. So it should be verified to make sure it came from a trusted source. Connected healthcare technology often relies on a lot of devices communicating with each other to orchestrate effective patient care. Device-to-device trust is a different problem than simply authenticating something or someone to a centralized server. So you need to consider the level of trust that is required when devices talk to each other and how that trust relationship is established. And, just a last kind of touching point here, you need to build in a secure update mechanism for resolving security issues later in the device lifecycle. It's pretty unlikely that you'll catch everything on the first release. So give yourself a chance to prevent a wide-scale full recall by implementing a secure update mechanism into the core of the device. Okay, next slide. Authentication and authorization. So a simple mistake that I've seen made quite a few times, and I'm not naming any names, but is the use of hard-coded credentials, right? Often common to a family or class of devices. Every device should have a unique identity and associated set of credentials. The use of hard-coded common credentials will not only open up all of your devices to spoofing, cloning, or unauthorized access, but will also offer you zero recourse or revocation when the credential is finally abused. The use of PKI offers a lot of benefits, including device-to-device trust, authentication, data encryption, data signing, etc. But the choice of whether to use a public or private certificate authority as the trusted route will really depend on the use case. For example, devices connecting to public-facing services or other third-party devices will often utilize a public route, as it's easier to establish the trust for a certificate signed by, say, Komodo, right, than it is to validate a route that is private. But there are uses for private route CAs too. For example, when connecting the device to a service that is owned by the device manufacturer, both devices and servers should store obviously all of those private keys away from unauthorized access as well. Utilizing hardware security modules for servers and trusted platform modules or TPMs or secure elements in devices are a great industry recognized way of doing that. And just lastly, to touch on these 2 points at the bottom here, devices and users should be authenticated and authorized before being allowed to access both remote and local services. This extends beyond the usual server-side implementations down into local inter-device communication. PKI can help deliver authentication and authorization for local device-to-device communication through a cryptographically validated trust hierarchy. This really helps the local devices make a smart decision about who it can talk to, even if it is disconnected from the internet, as is the case, with a lot of medical devices. Next slide. Okay, data encryption. So it should be pretty obvious by now that sensitive data needs to be encrypted. I'm sure we're all aware of it. As I previously mentioned, encryption is easy if I want to use a single encryption key for all of my data. But that isn't really a tangible solution, because if that single key is compromised, then obviously so is all of the sensitive data. So a couple of key points here, use industry standard crypto. As a device manufacturer or service provider, you should never attempt to create your own cryptographic algorithms. It's pretty much suicide. It's incredibly unlikely that you will succeed, and it shouldn't really even be attempted. Standards exist for a reason, and they've been proven over time and are trusted by industry and experts. Data analytics is a bit of a case of garbage in, garbage out. If you can't trust where the data is coming from, then you can't really trust your analytics to provide an accurate result. So signing data, if possible, is a great step to prevent data tampering, spoofing, and just the ingest of bad data. Access to sensitive encrypted data stored in your IoT platform, ThingWorx, for example, and associated encryption keys should be controlled and authorized using centralized systems that really allow you to enforce your internal security policies, not only against devices, but users too, right? An authenticated user does not necessarily equal an authorized user. And just touching on the last point here, sensitive data should remain encrypted at rest, really to prevent unauthorized access on both the device side, and that's important, and the server side. Okay, next slide. Logging and auditing. So, in the unfortunate event that a security breach does ever occur, going back to GDPR, reporting a breach within 72 hours, this is really aligned to kind of those regulations, but you will need to demonstrate that reasonable controls were in place to prevent it and be able to prove who accessed what and when. So creating a good audit trail is a great way to ensure that you have the right protection in place for your organization. Keeping an eye on your devices, the sensitive data and user actions will be invaluable for the audit process and give you visibility on who your device is communicating with, who is accessing the sensitive data, where the data is coming from. And good analytics can really help you identify anomalies and allow you to respond appropriately. Threat reporting is obviously important. So creating an auditable logs is not really an effective strategy if the information is never seen or acted upon. So you need to detect, notify, and remediate security issues. Again, analytics can be an effective tool for that. Next slide. So software updates, right. Unsecured software update procedures really effectively create an open remote code execution attack that will allow anyone to deploy and run their own software on devices that are potentially keeping someone alive. Software updates should be cryptographically signed by manufacturers or software vendors before being pushed to devices. On the device side, the signature can be verified and validated before allowing the code to be installed or executed. So the devices should implement the appropriate validation checks just to ensure that the software update came from a trusted source, hasn't been tampered with en route. In addition to verifying the update code, the device should actually seek permission before applying the update. For some mission-critical systems, this should come in the form of user-based authorization, really to ensure that the device is not in the middle of a critical process when the update is applied. I don't really know about you guys, but the last thing that I would want is my heart monitor rebooting itself while I'm going into cardiac arrest. So something to think about. And I'm sure most people watching are aware, but for anyone that isn't, the FDA actually does not typically require review or approval for software changes or updates on medical devices that are made to enhance or strengthen the security of a device. And there's a link at the bottom of this slide where you can find that guidance written. Okay, so, really in conclusion and wrapping up here, there are a lot of benefits to a connected medical device strategy. The results can be literally life-changing for patients and very rewarding for organizations through the increased operational efficiencies and data insights. An application enablement platform such as PTC's ThingWorks can offer tremendous value right out of the box with built-in solutions to help with data analytics, device management, data ingestion and visualization, all the good things that Paul touched on before. And it will help you reduce your time to market and give you real operational insight into how your devices are performing. It's important to be aware of the risks surrounding any connected device solution. And unfortunately, you don't know what you don't know, right? But regulations and standards are there to ensure that organizations have the necessary guidance that they need to deliver a secure solution, that protects both the patient and the company. And last but not least, engage with a security specialist. It's difficult to mark your own homework, right? But essentially, and especially on topics as complex as security, security vendors exist for a reason, and we provide domain expertise and purpose-built solutions that will help you simplify and accelerate the process of securing your devices and infrastructure so that the right security can be built in from the start.
Right, thank you, James and Paul. And just a quick note, just to say apologies for anyone that had issues with Paul's sound. But I'm just going to open up quickly just for a quick fire Q&A. If you haven't submitted your question already, please submit it now. So James, I've got a quick one for you. So it's basically asking about devices that are already deployed. Can they have their security upgraded?
Yeah, so I mean, just jumping back to one of the last couple of slides that I presented, often there are update procedures in place, in a lot of devices, I think nowadays. And again, just touching on the FDA regulations, they don't typically need to assess an update that is intended to enhance the security. So, absolutely, the devices that are already out in the field, inevitably will have some form of update mechanism. And, if it's not secure at this point, maybe that next update should include that security patch.
And Paul, are you still there?
Can you hear me, Rosa?
Yes, I can. Okay, I've just got a really quick one for you. Someone's just asking about medical device opportunities with the ThingWorks platform, whether you're engaging more, I guess, seeing an increase in opportunities with medical manufacturers.
Yeah, very much so. In fact, so much that we have actually built a medical device practice in Europe now, which is a team of specialists that work inside PTC, who are there dedicated to understanding the needs of med device manufacturers and helping them, not just on digital transformation, but let's say other more traditional PTC tools like the PLM environment, for example. But absolutely, and again, it's an area that we see growing, I would say, in all of our markets across Europe. So yeah, it's definitely a growth area for us, as the slide at the beginning backed up.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. I'm just aware of the time, so I'm just going to bring everyone's attention to the slide that I've got up at the moment. Device Authority is offering some really great offers here, off a POC, free trial. So please reach out to us. Let us know if you're interested. Any questions that we haven't been able to answer, we will get back to you all individually. Again, apologies for any sound issues. We look forward to engaging with you in the future. And also, just to point you out to our website, we've got some More webinars coming up in February and March, and we'd love to hear from you again. And again, thanks James, and thanks Paul, and thanks everyone that's been listening today.
Thank you.
Thank you.